Welcome to the HMO Property Show. By investors, for investors. Catch us weekly as we discuss all things cash flow positive property investing. Whether you're a seasoned investor, a new landlord, or just curious about property investing, this is the podcast for you. Sponsored by the Co-Living Collective, your trusted partner in creating vibrant and sustainable shared living experiences. Visit us at colivingcollective.com.au to learn more.
Welcome back to the HMO Property Show. I'm your host, Neil Gibb, and today I have the pleasure of introducing you to somebody that I'm very privileged to call not only a mentor, but a friend. He has been a big part of mine and Joe's life for maybe the last 3, maybe 4 years. Today, we've only got one part of the relationship we're recording on. Well, one day we might get his beautiful wife, Marie, on, but today we've got Brett Jones on the podcast. Brett, welcome along, mate. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you, Neil. And as always, mate, appreciate the invite and, very privileged to be here. So thanks.
Right. I think it's important that, the knowledge and the wisdom that you have gets shared around more and more, mate, because like I said, you've had a profound impact on my life and Joe's life. And the backstory to that is when I was introduced to you through Calvin Coyles, who's also been on the podcast, myself and Joe sat down and we said, oh, this looks pretty interesting. Let's go along to the event. We were just hoping to get like a little 1% out of it. Knowing that we were going to get like a 25 to 30% total life changing experience. And little Freddie G is also on this planet, mate, because of the guidance and the nudging that you gave me. So, mate, thank you very much for everything.
Yeah, my pleasure, mate. It's awesome to see that sort of change and the fact that you guys are the type of people that when there's an opportunity, you dive into it. And I think that's important for anyone that's listening to the podcast. What I've seen over the years is that opportunities come up and most of us tiptoe our way into those opportunities. And I think one of the skills in life is to recognize when those doors and those passageways do open up to us. It's like you have to recognize those and then just go for them. In my own life, as you well know, I'm now 65, nearly 66. So, hopefully maybe 60% of the way through my life, maybe, 50%, whatever it's going to be, we'll see. But I think at my age, it's important to reflect back and look at, okay, what did I learn? What worked? What did not work? And then as a mentor, as an elder, go, okay, what can I pass on to those, younger than myself? Because that's always been a tradition, right? Throughout our human history. And I think it's a great disadvantage in our culture now that unlike, say, the Japanese culture, we respect that. And certainly if you're at least a little bit self-aware, you can do that and go, okay, I want to pass these things on to people that I've learned, not only from my own experience, but now, as a coach and a mentor for the last, quarter of a century, what have I learned and what have I observed from other people and what have they been able to implement that actually works in life?
Yes, I think it's super important as well. And I've said this on other podcasts, it's very important that the people you get to coach or mentor you have had the experiences in life that you want to learn from. And
yes,
probably plain to say that you have been there, done that, got the t-shirt with quite a few things in life.
Yeah, some of the bruises as well, mate, right? In my younger years, I didn't know how to slip when that right came, and copped it in the head. And I think that's important too, that you want to listen to someone that's made a lot of mistakes, but also, obviously had a lot of successes as well, because you can learn from both of those. Yeah. So as you well know, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and certainly in my early 20s, I was very focused on business. It was the thing that I was focused on in my life. And for whatever reasons, I was highly successful, in my 20s. Like most people, I just started out like cleaning floors, from midnight till 6 o'clock in the morning, to support my family. I went to uni and I was doing that at night and then going to study in the day after a couple of hours of sleep. And I started in real estate, just doing residential property management. And, that's an interesting career because you get to go into people's houses. And I tell you what, Neil, you see a lot of interesting stuff people leave around, particularly in bedrooms they should not be leaving around, right?
I know that.
And I managed to show the company that I had, I guess, some natural expertise in marketing that unknown to me at that time. My father was a salesman, and you unconsciously model these things. Even though you're not thinking about it, you do pick up those skills through modeling, through absorption. And so I was quite good at marketing and got into real estate leasing at a time in Perth when the market was booming, and made a lot of money, transferred to Melbourne. And whilst there, had this idea that I wanted to go into development. And synchronistically, certain things happened. And I got into development, started up my own company, left Collies International, left the directorship there, so left my partnership there to go and do my own thing. And again, I was in a boom period, just rolled on from one project. First project was pre-leased to Westpac, pre-sold that.
None of your own money as well, wasn't it?
Sorry?
None of your own money in the deal as well?
No, none of my own money in the deal. So I'd worked out, because I'd seen my previous boss do something similar, how to start a deal with no money at all, pre-lease it to somebody, of substance like Westpac, but also pre-sell it. So my only risk then was really the construction risk. And I, like most people when you first start out, didn't quite get that right and had some issues with the builder. Next one, of course, after that was a fixed price contract with no variations and documentation in place to make sure, that there was no scope for variations from the builder.
Yeah.
And made about 350,000, which you could triple that now. So about $1 million on the first deal.
Yeah.
Made $6 million for the partnership on the second deal. So it's about $18 million now. Of which I, got 6. And then, being young and stupid, bought a farm up at 2J, bought a house in Peppermint Grove and renovated it. Did all the stupid stuff you do when you're in your 20s, right? Bought a Porsche and, all the glitter stuff. And knew that there was a change coming and attempted to set ourselves up. But again, one of the things I learned through going through that process was I broke my own rules. One of the rules I saw was that, having been brought up in Western Australia, it's very much a boom and bust economy, given the mineral and mining background that we have here. And my rule was, don't develop in Western Australia. Well, we did a package deal here where the office building was pre-leased. And so we did one little deal, and that was really quite easy, and went well. And then we got offered to purchase this site here, which we did, and we had pre-leasing for the building, went ahead with that. Then we got another deal offered to us, which was a $100 million deal to buy the Palmyra Hilton Hotel, 3 office buildings on St. George's Terrace, and a large block of vacant land down on Mounts Bay Road. And the sum of splitting those things up was much greater than the purchase price we were paying. And it was an option deal, $100,000 down on a $100 million deal, refundable.
Yeah.
So it looked too good to refuse.
Yeah.
Break your own rules. And it was that deal that ended up sinking the company. So at the peak, we got to $400 million worth of developments under construction. And the whole thing collapsed. And the worst part about that was that it cost me my family, cost me my marriage. And that's something you can't replace. I still had the skills, so I had the skills to make that money back. And when I did it in a very different way, taking out the risk factors that I'd ignored, when I was in my 20s and 30s. And the great thing about that was, yes, I had the skills, but I realized I didn't have the skills when it came to family, and I didn't certainly have the skills when it came to relationships. And whilst I had all the skills necessary to be great in business, and this is so typical for men, right? that by our culture, by our nature, evolutionary wise, we can be very good at business and very focused in that area. You know, one of the things about our brain structure is that we can be very, very focused on things. And that's great when it comes to business, and it forces us into our head cognitively to process things. But where it takes us away from is our heart. And this is not airy fairy, you know, if you're listening to this and you're going, oh my God, you know, where are we going here? We have neurons in our heart muscle. So we now know that the vagus nerve between our brain and our heart actually sends more information from our heart to our brain than the other way around. So there is a definitive science around this that shows us that we need both functions, particularly when it comes to relationships. And often, both as men and women, because women now particularly have been forced into their heads as well. One, we go through a 12-year education system of doing it right. But a lot of women are obviously now in business and very good at it, and they should be. There's no reason why they shouldn't be. But it does force us into our heads. And this is a massive disadvantage when it comes to relationships. So often we don't change from that state that we're in handling business into the state we need to communicate in our relationships. And I certainly did not have those skills. And after a 10-year marriage and 4 children, the emotional cost of that, forget about the financial cost of it, which is quite large. The emotional cost of it is way too much to pay. Excuse me. So I made a decision that I needed to upskill, same as you and Joe made when you came to our event.
Yeah.
And I spent a considerable amount of time, energy, and money investing in myself to make sure that that was never going to happen to me again. And now, having been with my wife Marie for 31 years and married for 29, coming up this weekend actually, it was well worth the time, energy, and effort. Was I concerned about going into another relationship again? Yes, because Neil, what most of us do in certainly the first and the second and, you know, ongoing relationships is we might want the love. We might want all the benefits of the relationship, but men and women want very, very different things. I'll get to that in a minute, but we might want the same things. But what most of us do is when we get into an argument or a disagreement in the relationship, 99.9% of us withdraw our love.
Why is that?
And that's a big communication. So a study done a couple of times in the US, once at UCLA, but also at the University of Wisconsin, shows that 93% of communication in an intimate relationship is nonverbal. That does roll over into businesses as well, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Human beings' communication, a lot of it is nonverbal. It's not just, you know, what we say. Like I can say to somebody, I love you, or I can say, I love you. And, you know, using the same words, but the effect obviously is completely different. So in intimate communication, how we communicate is influenced by 4 major things. Firstly, evolution. Your brain, my brain, completely structured and designed differently to our gorgeous wives' brains. You know, we have one center that lights up when you do a brain scan that processes listening and language. A woman's brain has 5. And typically in a conversation, there are a lot of surveys around this, but typically when you listen to the structure of a woman's language to explain something, they use a lot more words than we do. Now, there's a process called flooding. And what that means is that when a woman uses a lot of words like that, particularly in an energetic manner to us, generally using words like you always or you never, yeah, and men hear that obviously as criticism, that creates a dynamic where we know scientifically, because it's been measured, that our adrenaline actually starts to rise. And as a guy, if you really recognize this, you can feel it. So we either start to get angry and agitated about it, or we realize that's happening. So then we just shut it down, we close off, and we walk away.
And that causes arguments and frustration.
Yeah, totally. Because again, what we know scientifically is that the only way a woman can really de-stress, properly de-stress, is getting her words out.
Yeah.
We know that when she's using a lot of those words, the levels of oxytocin in her body, the relaxer hormone, but also the connector hormone, increase substantially. So that allows her to de-stress. Now, for us as men, it's completely the opposite. We de-stress by not talking. So that evolutionary biological process that's built into both of us creates an immediate dynamic inside the relationship
100%.
that makes it extremely difficult to connect.
100%, 100%. Now, people might be listening to this podcast now, Brett, and thinking, why are they even talking about this?
Yes.
And I think it's important just to go back a few steps and
Sure.
think about the things that you've just explained there. In your 20s, you're at a business that was doing $400 million worth of developments. It went south, your marriage went south. And this is basically what a mentor brings to the table when you're connected with a mentor. You want to tap into that experience and stand on the shoulders of giants so that you can avoid the pitfalls that other people have been through, right?
Correct.
So the podcast today, if people are trying to understand where we're going with this, is I speak to so many people that might not be at the level that Brett's been at or the level that I'm at. They might just be starting out into investing. And what I said to Brett for this podcast is I want people to understand the difference between men and women. I want them to understand why two is more powerful than one. And that's a big banner at the back of your event that you do, Brett, which is like really powerful. And I want people to understand that once you do understand each other and you understand the different dynamics of how people think and act and why they do these things, then the outcome to investing, and you might not want to build a business, but you might to build a portfolio, but you both need to be on the same page and you both need to avoid these arguments.
Yes. And that's a really important factor, because as you well know, I do wealth mentoring.
Yes.
And one of the dynamics that comes up immediately inside that is that generally inside our relationship, you tend to see that one person has a higher risk profile, and then dynamically the other person has a lower risk profile.
Yeah.
And so this communication that we've begun to talk about immediately comes up when, as a partnership, you're looking to create what we call a kingdom with a king and a queen. Now, the king and the queen are equal, but equally, women tend to want their man to lead. What that means, leading is not controlling, but what leading means is to go responsible for areas of their life, not just investing, across the kids and all other areas, and be on top of all those areas and leading in that, like, okay, the kids need this right now. Yes, we do need to make this investment right now. And if she's more gung-ho and she's the one that wants to make the investment, then you need to balance out those two things. Obviously, one person's going to have one perspective on that. But in terms of conveying that perspective, Neil, this masculine-feminine dynamic is going to get in the way of the communication, because we're not just talking about facts here. Women communicate emotions. Men focus in on facts. So if we're talking about investment, kids, money, sex, whatever it might be, in-laws, doesn't matter. We'll talk about the topic, but what she's interested in is her emotions being expressed about that topic. So to her, she's not talking about the money, she's talking about her emotions about this. And she needs that then to be acknowledged, because if he doesn't acknowledge those emotions that she's expressing, he's got a major problem on his hands. She's going to be then going, well, you're not listening to me. Yes. She'll use words like that. And he's going, well, what do you mean I'm not listening? I'm here. I'm standing here. I'm listening to you. What she's actually saying is, you're not getting my emotions. You're not getting my fear. Now, again, scientifically, we know that women experience more anxiety and fear than men do. Biologically, evolutionary wise, this has been built in for millions of years. And I know this sounds a bit brutal, but 100 years ago, if you were a woman, you were physically in danger most of the time. You were physically in danger of being assaulted or, unfortunately, raped. That's the reality of what our culture used to be like. Now, that's not the case now, clearly. However, we're talking millions of years evolution and a cultural change of maybe 100, 150 years. So that inbuilt level of anxiety is still there. And as men, we need to recognize that. We don't walk out the front door and need to worry about those things. We don't even think about that. But when you talk to thousands of women, as I have, in most countries around the world now, what you see is that these underlying evolutionary and biological processes are in place consistently, both for men and women. And as men, we tend to want to be the provider and the protector still.
Yeah. So if let's say we've got two people that want to do an investment, and we've got the man, and I'm not just picking the man for any reason here, but we've got the man that wants to do the investment. The female's a little bit more reserved, and they've got a confrontation now where she's pulling back. She's trying to communicate, and the male just isn't picking it up. What tips can you give people there so that they can resolve that sort of conflict?
Yeah. Well, as a woman, you need to recognize if that is the dynamic, and as we've explained, sometimes it'll be the opposite way around.
Yeah.
And we'll cover that in a minute, maybe.
Yeah.
So if that's the dynamic, as a woman, you need to recognize that men are naturally more risk takers. You only need to look at little boys. Yep. They're more than happy to climb to the highest point of the tree and then leap off, ignoring that they're 30 feet up in the air, expecting nothing's going to happen when they hit the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, mum will be downstairs going, oh my God, don't climb the tree. And the guy will be like, nah, he'll be right. So those are generally built in, right, that way. So he'll be more inclined to want to take that risk of making the investment. But equally, what we say is this is where the queen or his female partner comes in, because yes, it seems like a negative that she's more wired to security and safety than he is, but it's also a good thing because she'll point out all the pitfalls. Right, that probably he hasn't seen. So I might have more skills in property and investing in the stock market than my wife does, but I always consult with her before I make those investments, because she will just pull something out that, like, literally as a man, I have just not even thought of. And this includes in business as well.
Yeah.
So her perspective on it is invaluable. And when we recognize the strengths that we both have as a couple making investments, this is critical. This is critical. So equally, he needs to take that into account when she's expressing these things. Oh, okay, yeah, and acknowledge that. Yes, I hadn't thought about that. But what we can do to take care of that risk is this. We're investing with someone that knows what they're doing. We're investing in a product that has been well thought out. There are plenty of other examples here of successful investments. What are the downsides? Let's look at those and let's make sure we have those downsides covered, because that's what a good investor does when you're making investments. Equally, if she's more gung-ho and he's the reserve one, then we perhaps need to recognize that maybe the states here have changed. Maybe he's more in his feminine state, she's more in the masculine state. And that can be a problem dynamic now, because as a woman, ideally she wants him to lead this, to be positive, to be with her. And then she'll feel like, well, she's carrying all the responsibility of this, emotional responsibility. Forget about the logistics and the actions of it, the emotional responsibility of taking this stuff on. And while she want to go ahead, she doesn't really want to have to carry that. She's got enough on her plate at the moment.
I was going to say, can you, for the listeners who might not understand the difference between the masculine and the feminine, and a female dropping into a masculine and a male dropping into his feminine energy, can you give us a brief overview on that, Brett, so people understand it and potentially recognize it as well?
Yeah. So how we show up in the world and how we make decisions is influenced by four main things. The first is, like we've been talking about, the evolutionary side of things and the biological side of things. Second is the role models that we had, the people of influence in our life growing up had a major impact on how we make decisions. And this is very, again, relevant for investment. Like, you might not think about it, but it's actually true. Like in my own case, I watched my father get sacked when he was in his 50s. I've only worked for people 3 times in my life, because the emotional decision I made back then was, if they can do that to him, I never want to be in the position where someone can do that to me. So I've always pretty much worked for myself from a very early young age, not realizing it was the emotional impact of what I saw and experienced from my role model that made me make those decisions. So that's very relevant. Secondly, events that happen in a life. You get dumped enough times by a woman, you're going to be a little bit reserved to get back in that saddle again. Yeah.
Yep.
And lastly, from our culture. Grow up in India or China or Asia or the Arctic Circle, you're going to have a different culture and responses to growing up in America or Australia or the UK. So those things influence us in terms of how we show up to make decisions. And that impacts on the biological side and the cultural side when it comes to us as men and women. So women can be in the masculine state or the feminine state, and equally so can men. And we know that as a man, as an example, if I'm in my feminine state, my levels of testosterone will be 40% lower, indicated by, taking a blood sample. So what does that mean? What does the masculine look like? Well, the masculine's certain. The masculine is honor, integrity. In other words, if I say I'm going to do something, this is very important for women, for trust and safety. If I say I'm going to do something, it's done. Integrity, bravery, loyalty. All right, loyalty. I'll plow through things and I'll keep going. And protection. That's the masculine. If I'm in my feminine, I'm going to be minging, which is man whinging, about her and what she's not giving me. I'm going to be uncertain. I'm going to use a lot of words. I'm going to what's called over-explaining myself, which happens during flooding. A man shifts during flooding into his feminine state, and then we'll start using a lot of words trying to communicate with her and get his meaning across. And physiologically, because the testosterone levels are down, she will experience that. There's things called pheromones that are around us. She will get that communication through the pheromones, and that will put her into a higher state of anxiety, which will then automatically, through the unspoken communication, push her into her masculine state. So if she's in her feminine state, she'll be in flow, she'll be in intuition, she'll be cognitively experiencing everything holistically. Left and right hemispheres of her brain are better connected than ours. She'll be getting the big picture on everything. If she moves into her masculine state, she'll be over-controlling, as a man is in his feminine state. If a man's controlling, it's his feminine, not his masculine. And so she'll be in control, trying to control everything, controlling him, controlling the kids, taking responsibility for everything, doing everything, feeling stressed, worn out, exhausted, angry, confrontational. They're the hallmarks of those different states. And when we learn to get that balance, because everything in the universe, whether you believe it or not, it's observable, is yin and yang, positive and negative. So inside a relationship, we need balance between those two different states to be on the same page and get the communication right. Because when you get it right, Certainly as a man, and I know for women, the experience is different, but as a man, there's a hell of a lot more peace.
Yes, 100%.
Which is just, like it's just a gift.
Yeah.
For a woman, what it feels like when we're on the same page is there's a lot less stress.
Yeah.
So just really briefly, this changed after World War I and World War II. And men on a scale we'd never seen before were trained to kill. Yeah, we've had wars for our entire human history, but not on the scale we had in the 1940s and earlier than that. And that whole period of 3 decades was World War One, Great Depression, World War Two. So massive, massive amounts of stress. And men in World War Two, 85% of men in Australia were in the war. So if you wanted a gun built, you wanted a thermos built, that was built by women. Men went around. So they not only had to go into the factories, not only did they have to look after the kids, the house, the finances, his parents, because he was away, her parents. So women were pushed into the masculine to handle everything. Men were sent off to war and exposed to massive amounts of trauma. Now, the only way you can cope with trauma, the amounts that they experience, is close off your emotions. Just shut them down, right? That's the only way you can do it. There is no other method. And they used to call it shell shock. And if you don't believe me, go and look up, videos on social media of shell shock and the effects of that. And that produced a generation of men that had been conditioned, taught, experienced, and learned to close up their emotions. So the next generation of little boys observed that, modeled that. So now we had this complete generation, my generation, that modeled that behavior and learned that in a relationship or when things are tough, just shut down. Like I've got a TikTok channel. One of the videos on there's got 5 million views, and it's called "Why Men Shut Down and Walk Away." And there's like 40,000 comments on there from women. Oh my God, that's my husband. Oh my God, yes, that's him. Right? So this is epidemic, which is why we have a 60% plus. This is not my theory. So the Gottman Institute, which does a lot of psychological research around relationships, did a study over about 7 years, and they concluded with a 93% accuracy. This dynamic that I'm talking about is the reason that we have such a high relationship breakup divorce rate, which is 60% plus. Yeah. Now, if I said to you, Neil, here's a parachute, take you up in a plane, you got a 40% chance of surviving, mate, off you go.
No, thanks.
I don't think you'd take the bet, right? And so when I went back into a relationship and I saw these sorts of statistics, like 60% plus first marriages, 73% failure rate on second, and 93% failure rate on third. Why? Because people don't change these underlying behaviors I've been talking about. So I didn't want to play that Russian roulette game. I wanted to make sure, just the same approach that I have, when it comes to investing, I want to take out all the risk, or as much risk as I can possibly take out. So I wanted to learn the skills that would take that risk out for me and my wife.
Yeah.
And it works.
Yeah, it does work. And I want to use myself and Joe, and I'm happy for you to share some of the things that we've worked on together as well, and the outcomes that we've got, because you stand on stage and talk about this for 3 days straight. And there's also another event that you are on stage for a week for, which me and Joe have done all of your stuff, mate. We're very grateful for it. I think the big things for us as well were the things that you just touched on there, the masculine and feminine energy. And when you explain this to us, we noticed quite a lot that Joe, being in the industry she was in at the time, was in that masculine energy quite a lot. And it knocked me into my feminine very, very easily. And we spent a lot of that time clashing. And like I say, we came to you thinking our relationship was good and we were looking for 1%ers. And just that one thing that you've taught there had a huge impact on our relationship. Now I understand, and I can feel it when I drop into the feminine. And I
So
can,
what's your experience, just for the guys that are watching, because
yeah.
I think whenever I talk about the feminine initially, at least with guys, they're like, what are you calling me a girl? Yeah. So what we're really talking about here is a set of behaviors that
Yes.
is reflected because of all the dynamics that we've been talking about. So what was your experience of being in the feminine?
Well, we clashed a lot because that energy is just not correct, is it? You
Mm,
drop out of that certainty because she's challenging quite a lot.
yes. Yes.
Um,
Which is the crazy thing, right? Because as men, if we come to business or things like that, we're very certain. We are mostly in the masculine state
mm,
when we're conducting business or at work. And most men are the same. But the problem is that by the conditioning, when we come home, because of the models that we've had, the culture we now have, we step straight into unconsciously that sort of uncertain state. Because as men, we want our partner to be happy. So
yes.
we fall into trying to please her. And the moment we hear that criticism, it's like, as a man, well, you're ignoring all the other things that I'm doing and you're honing in on this one thing.
Yeah.
But for her, that dynamic is critical because her brain physiology is all wired to where's the danger, where's there's a problem. But the problem becomes that when she does initially tell us about it, she's probably been thinking about it for maybe 3 weeks or more. It's built up in her. And so when she does start to express it, it comes out as, yeah, pretty much, or you never, or you're always.
Yeah.
And it comes out in the masculine from her. And the moment it does, we step into anger. We get pissed off because she's accusing us.
Feel
What do
unappreciated.
you, yeah, unappreciated. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that you're talking about is epidemic.
Yeah. And there's a trick that you teach as well on the code event, which we won't go
Mm.
through it now because I think if people have got some value from this, then the next step for them is to reach out and actually go through this. Well, obviously we were introduced you through Calvin. We've connected maybe 20 different people to you guys and they've all got incredible results and they're all happy. And people always comment on man and Joe's relationship by saying you guys always look happy. And it's because we've got that dynamic right now.
Yep.
She always says she feels my certainty, she feels my loyalty, and
Yeah.
that allows her to be in her feminine, And I've always found Jo attractive, but she's even more attractive when she's in that feminine energy. It's just the most beautiful thing on the planet.
It is. And men, again, I think don't naturally recognize this, but when I talk to them about it, they do then recognize it. And that is there's nothing better for us than when our female partner is open to us.
Yes.
We can feel that.
Yes.
And as human beings, she knows when we've got a chest plate on or it's closed off to her.
Yeah.
And equally, we know the same with her. And it doesn't become a point of discussion until you start getting aware about these things. This is just, they're just skills. What we're talking about is skills. And how does that impact in your field? Comes across every time when it comes to making a decision.
Absolutely.
And being comfortable together that we're going on a journey. For a woman, an investment is a journey.
100%.
For a guy, it's a piece of property or it's a stock or it's just a thing.
Yeah.
Right? That's not the case for her. She's like, okay, we're going on a little journey together here. Like, where are we going? What are we going to be doing? Are we going to have strawberries on the way?
There's one more thing that I want to touch on, Brett. We could talk about this all day. I mean, you're obviously incredibly knowledgeable around it. The other thing that we've noticed, you touched on it earlier, women use more words than men. I think it's women use 28,000 words a day and men use
approximately 7,000, so about 4 times as many on average. Yep.
Yep. So I never used to understand this. And it's the same with the girls in the office as well. They just love a chat. And that's great. That's women. It's the beautiful thing about them.
Yep.
Understanding that they need to get them words out is the important thing for a man, because I've spoke to some of my friends and they've said, fuck, all she wants to do is talk and she just wants me to listen. I'm like, yeah, it's really that simple, mate. If you sit there and listen, then give her 10, 15 minutes of your time and listen, then you've got the rest of the time to yourself. But if you don't listen, that's when the arguments start, the clashes start, and the rest of your night isn't your own because you're in that gridlock.
Yeah, because as men and women, we tend to think of it from our own perspective. So As a woman, you expect that, of course, she's going to want to listen because that's what another woman would do, right? She'd sit down with you and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And as men, we're like, get to the point. Like, what's the point of this conversation? Well, sometimes, gentlemen, there is no point. The point is for her to get her words out. And our solution, as you well know, Neil, is called the relationship code. We all come into our relationships with an existing code. Clearly, given the results that we get, that code is not working now, and we need a new one. So what we've developed is we know that when this flooding thing occurs, if he focuses on the words, he's lost. He's done. This is going to go sideways immediately. However, if he can train himself to focus in on her emotions instead of the words, and he can then know what the emotions are, what she's really looking to express, and validate that with her and feed that back to her, now we're on the same page. Now we've got a communication code that actually works. And that is the critical thing, because it just makes life far more enjoyable. We can start to build our investments and our kingdom, our treasury, as we call it, together, and make it head in the right direction. And that's important, because you and I both know that the superannuation system, or if you've got American clients, 401k, IRAs, etc., doesn't work. The average return is, about 7%. And that's if you're lucky and in the right fund. And long term, that is not going to provide for retirement. So we have to take responsibility outside of that for ourselves, because returns at much, much higher levels, like the difference between a 7% return and a 20% return, and people go, well, where are you going to get 20%? What you do provides that. There are many other methods of getting that too. And the difference over a decade is about $1 million difference. Yeah. And that's huge if you then compound that, for 4 decades or 3 decades.
100%. Can we, I know we're running out of time now, Brett, but I'd love to do another podcast in the future and dig a little bit deeper into your journey as a property developer as well, because the methods that you use then still work today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the methods don't really change, and you want to be able to minimize that risk, whether you're in, development or you're in flips or whatever it is that you're doing in property. Now, again, as you well know, I've got a degree in, property valuation. Not that I ever worked as a property valuer, but it was good to have that background. But experience counts a lot more in terms of how to structure deals, how to minimize that risk, how to make sure that what you're doing is successful.
Absolutely. So to tie this podcast up today then, because there's quite a lot of information in there, and I think people might have listened to it a few times, or go through some of the content that you've got on TikTok. TikTok your main channel now? I see a lot of stuff that you share from TikTok onto Facebook directing us back there.
Correct. Yeah. So okay. TikTok is our main channel now. Absolutely.
I'll get the team to put all of your links into the podcast notes so they can find you nice and easily. Would you be open to also sharing your Calendly link as well, so people can book some time in the calendar for a one-on-one chat?
Absolutely. Cool. Absolutely.
And what type of people would book in for a one-on-one chat with you?
All types of people. I mean, generally our clients are somewhere between about mid 30s to mid 50s, but obviously people on, younger and older than that come to our events, and they're generally married with a couple of kids, and they've probably got a business together, and there's communication problems.
So anyone that's having communication problems with the partner and they've got a busy life.
Absolutely. Our mission and our dedication, as you know, we've expanded to the US. We're expanding our partnerships on the east coast of Australia later this year. And we're going into Asia, into Singapore. So, what we're providing is, I think, essential for any couple these days. And if you're looking for a relationship, equally if you're a single and you're looking for a relationship and you haven't had great success in finding that person, there's a reason. And when you work on you and you change you, it can change that reason.
So to finish the podcast, Brett, what top 3 tips can you give anybody that's listening to this podcast now
Yeah.
that wants to get into property or wants to get into business or wants to do development, but him and her are on the wrong page currently?
Yeah. You've got to find the right vehicle to do that, something that you guys can agree on. I would always go, if you don't have the expertise yourself, go with a well-established partner, someone that's got a track record that you can piggyback on and gain the advantage of their skills. And thirdly, understand your individual risk profiles. One of you is going to have an appetite for higher risk and the other one lower risk. Realize the strengths in those two positions and come to a balance point with that. How can I learn from my partner that's got more of a risk profile? How can I be a bit more adventurous? In reverse, how can I learn from a partner that's got a lower risk profile and really look for the holes that perhaps I'm a bit too gung-ho or I just dismiss and go over the top of? They'd be my top 3, Neil.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Brett. It's been an absolute pleasure catching up, mate. And let's do it again soon, eh? I'd like to finish on this quote, which I don't know if I did it on the last one I did with you, but every master was once a disaster and every winner was once a beginner.
I think you did.
Thanks, Brett.
Okay, Neil. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you tune in the same time next week so you can stay up to date with all cash flow positive property updates.